I have just come back from a 3-day trip to Oxford and I've somehow come back with 15 books, so I'm going to do a book haul. It has become an annual tradition for me and my friend Rachel to go to Oxford every year at the time of the International Book Along List announcement, so we can spend time searching for the books, reading the books, and this is our 4th year but 5th trip that we've done, and I think we will continue doing it for a very long time. So we'll start off with the International Book Along List. I picked up 4 of them. We were literally sat in Blackwell's at 10 to 2 waiting for the announcement, and the second the announcement dropped, we ran to the shelves. There was only actually 1 book on the long list that I already owned and have read, which is On Earth as It Is Beneath. I only read it very recently actually, so the rest were books that I needed to pick up. A good few of them aren't actually published yet, but these are the 4 that I did get in Blackwell's. Firstly, we have The Wax Child by Olga Ravn. The Employees by Olga Ravn is one of my favourite books of all time. To me, that book is an absolute genius masterpiece, and it will probably be in my top 10 favourite books for the rest of my life. I still haven't read her other novel, My Work, but I was obviously very excited to read The Wax Child. I'm very excited to see it on the long list, as it's a book I obviously already wanted to read. The thing about Olga Ravn's work is that all 3 of her books that have been translated so far are so very different from each other. Like The Employees is a very weird speculative sci-fi, and then her 2 books since I feel like have been a huge departure from that. The Wax Child is quite a short book. It's translated by Martin Aitken, and this I believe is semi-based on a real 17th century witch trial. I did actually start reading this on my train home from Oxford. I've only read like 29-30 pages, so I've got no real thoughts so far, but I do love the way that Olga Ravn writes. I then got She Who Remains by Rene, Karabash, translated by Izidora Angel. This is from my Bulgarian author, and this is about a sworn virgin in an Albanian town. I loved this so much more than I thought I was going to. I anticipated that I would enjoy it, but I really enjoyed it. I read this in one single sitting on my train home, literally this morning. It's super short. It's only 140 pages and the font's quite big, and there's a lot of blank space, so this is definitely one you can read really quickly. I won't go too deep into my thoughts because I'll save that for my February reading wrap-ups, but this was absolutely beautiful. The writing was quite disjointed and could at times be confusing, I guess, but I just thought it was stunning, and the concept of a sworn virgin is not something I previously knew about, so learning about that was also interesting. And this is published by one of my favourite authors, Perrin Press. I have a good few of their books and they're always so good, and I'm always happy to see one of their books longlisted for a prize. Next I picked up The Nights Are Quiet in Tehran by Shida Bazyar, translated by Ruth Martin. This is one of the books on a long list that I've never seen before. I've never heard of it. I've not seen anyone talk about it, but I don't mind that. I like having a book that's a bit more of a surprise. I don't truly know what this book is about, but the top of the back says a captivating polyphonic novel of one family's flight from and return to Iran. So I'm probably just going to go into this one blind and not really pick up on what it's about to see if I'm pleasantly surprised. The last book I picked up from the International Book Prize is The Duke. This is published by Foundry Editions, which are another one of my favourite publishers. This is written by Matteo and translated by Antonella Lettieri. I'm really sorry if I pronounced those wrong. I did try my best. I've actually already finished this. I bought this on the first day in Oxford and read it across the 3 days that I was there. It's a bit of a chunky one. It's around 450 pages and I finished it literally this morning. I quite liked this. It's quite a mundane story really, and after reading 100 pages, I had no idea what the book was going to do for another 300, 400 pages. But I think I very slowly and quietly became quite invested, and by the end I realised I'd actually had a really good time with it. Again, I will give more detailed feedback on this one in my monthly reading wrap up, but that is the last of my haul from the International Book Prize. I picked up 1 book from a charity shop. We went in 3 or 4 charity shops and they were not really giving, but I did see 1 book that I've had on my wish list for a little while, which I was very excited about, and that is Sea State by Tabitha Lasley. This is non-fiction memoir. I came across this because I saw someone recommending it as one of the best pieces of non-fiction they've read. I cannot remember for the life of me who that was, but I've had it on my wish list ever since. So I was very excited to find it for £3.50 in an Oxfam charity shop. This is a memoir from Tabitha, who in her 30s, after leaving an awful relationship, she decides to quit her job and decides to commit to research on men who work on offshore oil rigs. She found herself interested in this because I do feel like people who work on offshore oil rigs It's quite a mysterious job. They spend a huge portion of the year away from home. So she wanted to research into them on what men are like when there are no women around, because it is a very male orientated job. In the middle of this research, Tabitha finds herself entering a relationship with one of these married oil riggers. I guess what starts off as a piece of non-fiction, a piece of research, ends up becoming more of a memoir about Tabitha's time doing this research and how it impacts on her own actual personal life. I'm very intrigued by this one. I'm reading a lot more non-fiction this year, so I'll probably definitely get to this in the next few months. There are a couple of bookshops in Oxford that sell brand new books for £5 or less. I don't truly understand where they get their stock from. I presume it's overstock from websites, from publishers, from bookstores, I don't know. But in there, they had Rainforest by Paver, which is her newest novel. It's actually only out in hardback at the moment, and I hadn't purchased it yet because I didn't want to get the hardback. But they had this paperback for $3.99, which I was astounded by. It does say on the back $15.99, so I can only presume this is maybe an airport paperback. Last year, I read Dark Matter by Paver, which was my first book from her, and I devoured it. I loved it. It is a horror and a ghost story set in a very cold climate. And that is what Paver does. She writes brilliant books that are set in different places in nature. And this one does what it says on the tin. This is a horror set in the rainforest. And I actually went to an event of hers in Nottingham at the end of last year. And she read an excerpt from this. And I'm so excited to read it. Also, Paver was one of the most interesting people I've ever had the pleasure of hearing speak. And she was so kind and lovely, and it just made me love her even more, so I can't wait to get to this. Oxford Blackwell's has a room called the Norrington Room, and if you've never heard of it, it is the single most beautiful room full of books you will ever see. It has, I think, over 100,000 books in there. It is primarily like academic books and maps and non-fiction, but it is the most stunning room to see, even if you don't actually pick up any of the books in there. I visit it every single time I go to Oxford. But they do often have some sale boxes in there, which are normally full of kind of books I have got no interest in. But this time the sale section was actually popping off, which is the main reason why I've come home from Oxford with so many books, because I did pick up 6 books in the sale section and they only cost me £12.99. The first book I got in the sale section was After the Sun by Jonas Eika. This is a collection of short stories from a Danish writer, and it's published by Lolly Editions, which again is another one of my favourite publishers, who, I don't know if anyone else has noticed, has been very quiet on social media recently. I've not seen them talk about any new publications coming, so I'm not too sure what's happening with them. But I was very excited to find this for one single Great British pound in the sale section. It's not damaged at all. They actually had quite a few copies, so I don't know if they just had a lot of excess stock of this particular book. But I've had this on my wish list for a really long time. It's one of those books where every time I go to the bookstore, I look at it, and for some reason, I've just never actually picked it up. And I'm kind of glad I didn't, because now I found it for £1. Then found a New York Review book for $3.99 in the sale section. And this is Bambi. I actually had no idea that Bambi was originally a book. I also didn't know it was translated. So Bambi first came out in Vienna over 100 years ago. And this is a new translation. So it was already previously translated into English, but this edition is translated by Damien Searls, which is the most recent translation. I don't think I've watched Bambi since I was a very small child, so I can't really remember the story, but I'm actually really excited to read it in book form. I think that'll be super interesting. And I'm always happy to find an NYRB book at a super cheap price, because they are probably my favourite publisher of all time, but they're also very expensive here in the UK. Then for $2.99 in the sale section, I got Trash by Sylvia Aguilar Zeleny, translated by JD Pleucker, and I got this for $2.99. I have seen this a few times in bookshops, but again, it's a book that's always intrigued me, but for some reason I've never picked it up. This is from a Mexican author. I thought this was a short story collection, but it's actually not. It's a novel that follows 3 separate characters, and it follows the complexities of survival, joy, love and violence for 3 different women. I don't know if this book has a UK publisher, as this is a US paperback from Deep Vellum Press. If it does have a UK publisher, I will try and link it below. But that's why I'm very excited to find this so cheap, because US copies of books in the UK are always a bit more expensive. I then picked up Transparent City by Onjaki. This is published by Europa Editions, and I found this for £1. I had never heard of this book before, but I instantly was drawn to it because of it being published by Europa, and it sounds so interesting. It's translated from Portuguese. It says that Onjaki was born in Angola, but he's the most prominent African writer of Portuguese. And it says this is a captivating blend of magical realism, scathing political satire, tender comedy and literary experimentation. If you've read this, let me know what you thought of it in the comments. I've never heard of it before, but it sounds incredible. I then picked up a Ukrainian book for $2.95 in the sale. Again, this is a book I have seen on bookshelves before, but I've never picked it up because it was quite expensive. This was originally £16.95. As part of my day job, I actually support and work with Ukrainian people who have come to the UK on the Homes for Ukraine scheme. So I have learnt a lot about the journeys and experiences of Ukrainian refugees, and that is exactly what this novel is about. And I'm very excited to finally read a Ukrainian novel translated from Ukrainian. This book is by Volodymyr Rafienko and is called Monda Green, a novel, songs about death and love. The final book I got for £1 in the sale is Phosphor in Dreamland by Ricky Ducanet, and this is published by Dalkey Archive Essentials. This publisher always publishes the most interesting books, and the books always look stunning. They're all the same cover as this, different colours, different pictures. This is set on the imaginary Caribbean island of Birdland, and the novel takes in the form of a series of letters between a current resident to an old friend, describing the island's 17th century history that brings together the violent Inquisition, the thoughtless extinction of the island's exotic fauna, and the amorous story of the deformed artist, philosopher, inventor Phosphor. This sounds like it's going to be a bit of a fever dream, a bit confusing, a bit crazy. It does say it explores the relationship between power and madness. Never heard of this one before, but I do like this publisher, so I thought, why not pick that up for £1? Do let me know if you've read this, because I've not heard anyone talk about it before. Now, 3 books I did also pick up in Blackwell's, and one of them is one that I've had on my wish list for a while. One is that I picked up because I've seen a lot of people predicting it for the International Book Along list. It sadly didn't make it, but I'm still very intrigued to read it. And then one that was a staff recommendation. This is What Remains by Bray Lamela, translated from the Galician by Jacob Rogers. This is the book that I saw a lot of people predicting for the International Book Along list. It obviously sadly hasn't made it, but I was still very interested in reading it. I have definitely never read anything translated from Galician before and hadn't even heard of Galician, so that already makes me super interested in this book. This is actually published by Boulogne Press, who did have a book on the International Book Along list last year, so I am very interested in reading more from this publisher. I love a book that is about an event that happened a long time ago, but we're in the present day, where the narrator is researching this kind of lost piece of history, and this book does exactly that. This is about an event in the 1950s when over half of the inhabitants of the villages in Galicia were driven from their land in a brutal experiment to turn backward country people into modern cattle farmers. And then this book follows a young student researching this project of forced resettlement. This sounds incredibly interesting. It sounds like it's going to be incredibly emotional, and everyone I have seen on Instagram and TikTok reading this, whose opinions I trust, have been raving about this. So I feel like I need to get to this one really soon. The book I've had on my wish list for a little while. It is by Vu Trong Fung, making a... I don't know if I'm allowed to say that word on YouTube, so I'm not going to, just in case. This was originally written in the 30s, and I believe the author died only a matter of 2 years after writing the novel. And this is about a young girl who is born into a very upper class wealthy family, and when her mother becomes pregnant, she is fascinated by her pregnancy, but when she asks her family questions about it, they just dismiss her curiosity. You know, they tell her, you'll understand these things when you're older. But because of this, the fact that she still wants answers to her questions, she tries to find answers from her peers. So it's about the childish point of view of learning about physical pleasure. Considering this was written in the 1930s, I would estimate that this was very ahead of its time and potentially quite controversial with its topic. It does say in the front of the book, actually, I've just seen that this book was actually, well, not this book, the author's works in general were banned in the north of Vietnam and then nationally across Vietnam until the late 1980s. So I'm very intrigued. And finally, the last book I picked up, which was on the staff recommendation shelf, never heard of this before, but it sounds so incredible. This is The 20 Days of Turin by Giorgio de Maria, translated by Roman Glazov, and it actually has a foreword by Jeff Vandermeer. This is about a spare wing of a church-run sanitarium in Italy, which has a library that allows lonely people to read one another's diaries and connect with like-minded souls. But when their scribblings turn into ugly confessions, the library's users learn too late that a malicious force has consumed their privacy and their sanity. What then turns into a 20-day phenomenon of collective psychosis culminates inexplicably nightly massacres. After this, the library is shut down and erased from history until years later, a lonely salaryman decides to investigate these mysterious events. As I was just saying, I love books that are about someone researching something that has happened previously. This sounds crazy. I can't wait to read this.